Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 10th of April 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Vanessa Beeley. Well, World War III, Mike.
Yeah, well, let's start off with Theresa May. She was in Denmark and Sweden yesterday, and she basically had this to say. First, let me say a word on the reports this weekend of a barbaric chemical weapons attack in Douma, Syria, targeting innocent civilians, many of them children. The UK utterly condemns the use of chemical weapons in any circumstances, and we must urgently establish what happened on Saturdays. If confirmed, this is yet another example of the Assad regime's brutality and brazen disregard for its own people and for its legal obligations not to use these weapons. If they're found to be responsible, the regime and its backers, including Russia, must be held to account. She said that the events in Douma fit into a troubling wider pattern of acts of aggression and abuse of long-standing international norms on counter-proliferation and the use of chemical weapons. And if people have been paying attention to the language of Theresa May and other people in the West when they're making international statements about international affairs, we've dropped the term international law, and we're now talking about international norms. Because international law is relatively fixed. International norms can be changed whenever people feel like it, and that seems to be what's going on. She went on to say we will work closely with our allies, including at the UN Security Council later today, so this was a statement she made yesterday, to ensure that the international community strengthens its resolve to deal with those who are responsible for carrying out these barbaric attacks and who will allow global norms to be breached in such an appalling way. Well, this was followed up in the UN Security Council by the lovely Karen Pierce, who is the UK's permanent representative to the United Nations Security Council. She said, Mr. President, it's the third time in 5 days that the Council has convened to discuss chemical weapons. This is dreadful in the true sense of the word. The Council should dread what we risk happening, that chemical weapons become a routine part of fighting. And so she goes on with the usual rhetoric. It is the Syrian government, there's Iran and Russia who are prolonging the fighting and risking regional and wider stability, is what she said. Now, of course, yesterday I mentioned the Foreign and Commonwealth Office statement that they'd put out yesterday, which ended up with this sentence: we call on the Assad regime and its backers, Russia and Iran, to stop the violence against innocent civilians. And the point I made was that, of course, that's exactly what they're doing by clearing out the terrorists from many of the parts of many parts of Syria. So let's move on to what Donald Trump then had to say, and he made this statement. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by condemning the heinous attack on innocent Syrians with banned chemical weapons. It was an atrocious attack. It was horrible. You don't see things like that, as bad as the news is around the world. You just don't see those images. We are studying that situation extremely closely. We are meeting with our military and everybody else, and we'll be making some major decisions over the next 24 to 48 hours.
And then that was followed up with another Foreign and Commonwealth Office statement. The Foreign Secretary spoke to acting US Secretary of State John Sullivan this afternoon about Saturday's devastating attack in Douma, Syria. This follows his conversation with French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian this morning. The Foreign Secretary and acting Secretary of State agreed that based on current media reports and from those on the ground, this attack bore hallmarks of previous chemical weapons attacks by the Assad regime. They reiterated their commitment to standing up for the Chemical Weapons Convention and to securing that those responsible for this horrific attack are held to account. They underlined the importance of the UK, the US and France remaining in close touch. So let me bring Vanessa Beeley onto the programme at this point. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa. If the UK and US and France are remaining in close touch on this issue, and they're going to be making decisions in the next 24 to 48 hours. What do we see here? A new axis of evil?
Oh, I mean, you know, listening to these statements is such a complete inversion of reality and use of projectionism against the Syrian government, the Syrian army, its allies, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah on the ground, who have effectively liberated the eastern suburbs of Damascus from Western financed and promoted and backed terrorism. And you know, one thing that I want people to seriously consider, and it's only really been circulating in my own mind this morning, Gerrish al-Islam, who are the group that were occupying Douma, who have now been evacuated safely with light weapons to an area, we believe in Idlib actually. There was some confusion on the ground even over where exactly they were going to go. This group, and we'll come on to more details on this particular story later, but the atrocities that were committed by this group against the Syrian civilians living under their occupation for maybe 6 years. This group's PR machine was created actually by MI6, by British MI6, according to Thierry Meyssan and his review of the creation of Interchangeable in the UK, to basically run the PR for a certain number of so-called moderate terrorist groups. And Gerrish al-Islam was among those groups. So basically, through, again, the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, as exposed by The Guardian, actually, Ian Cobain, who's one of the very few genuine journalists left at The Guardian, through the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, Interchangeable was actually being financed to produce not only promotional films about these terrorist groups, but also to produce their logos, to brand them, basically, to brand them as the moderate terrorists inside, or the moderate extremists inside Syria. So the crimes committed by those groups against the Syrian people that are now coming to the surface, again, with the testimonies that are coming from civilians that are finally being released from their imprisonment, from their incarceration, from their brutality, those crimes, in my opinion, lie fully at the door of the UK Foreign Office and their regime change war in coalition with the United States, with France and other EU member states, Gulf states, and of course Israel. So this campaign of demonization, of ramped up demonization of the Syrian government is, I believe, in defense of their own reputation, which is already in tatters after a failed 7-year war in Syria, into which has been poured millions of taxpayers' funds, if not billions. And Paul Craig Robert came out today categorically saying there was no chemical weapon attack. He will stake his life on it based on the intelligence information he has been given. Now, this coincides with the Russian military investigation of the site that went on yesterday.
And indeed, we have this video clip here, which appears to show the Russians appearing at the site. There doesn't seem to be too much concern about the potential for toxic gas or nerve agent.
No, I mean, extraordinary. Who you're actually seeing here is, I'm obviously not going to give his name, but he's one of the generals who was in charge of the military campaign in East Aleppo, and who has worked very, very closely with the Syrian government and the Syrian military for some time, particularly in the reconciliation department of the Russian actors on the ground in Syria. And so he was obviously being tasked to enter the area, to enter the site where it was claimed there had been a chemical weapon attack. And when I spoke to him yesterday, or I messaged him, he basically said to me, look, there is zero evidence of a chemical weapon attack. Zero.
So what's the feeling on the ground then about the potential for some kind of attack from the West? You said that you sent me a message this morning suggesting that there are already assets being moved around.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, some people, as I think anyone would be, have slightly gone into denial in the sense that they'd like to believe the West is not as stupid as to precipitate us towards World War III. But unfortunately, I don't hold with those rather optimistic assumptions. Certainly, we're hearing that the US Navy is moving towards the Syrian coast. We're getting much more bellicose statements from Russian military experts.
Well, and indeed,
Russian TV.
I have one here. This is from Vladimir Shamanov, who's head of the State Douma Defense Committee, who said if the US attacks Syria, Russia would take all political, diplomatic, and if necessary, military retaliatory measures. We will not allow US to rivet nails on a foreign anvil. There will be no unlawful action left without an answer. That's a very unequivocal statement.
Yeah, and we're seeing that mirrored across a number of TV debate programs in Russia. I mean, certainly the feeling, and Paul Craig Roberts has reiterated that in his article today on the threshold of war. He's basically saying he is genuinely worried that now Russia, who has been, you know, an epitome of diplomacy up until now, has finally thrown the towel in and accepted that the US is not an honest broker. And that they are basically preparing for war, not only in Syria, but also in Russia. So this is a very big leap from what we were seeing among, you know, the Russian rhetoric over the last, let's say, from the beginning of the Skripal affair. You know, they were still trying to, I think, tamper things down, but now we're seeing them reaching probably the end of their patience. And at the end of the day, you know, Russia doesn't want to get bogged down or pulled down into a war inside Syria or even on its own soil, but it's more likely to be Syria as the battleground. You know, and I think it's very important to understand, speaking to Russians here, having spoken to them in Moscow, spoken to Maria Zakharova, the Russian priority is to avoid war. But we have to understand to what extent the United States, the UK and the EU, Israel, all of the players in the regime change alliance have pushed them to the brink of this decision, where they might even, according to some of the debates that were being aired over the last 2 days, they might even take the first step in order to actually accelerate what they believe is inevitably going to happen anyway.
That's a pretty dark picture. Now, Vanessa, let's move on to broader things. You sent me this image a day or two ago, and I think you were, first of all, a bit unsure what it represented, but we have a white helmet here, daubing comments on a wall with paint, but it was the use of the word swarm that grabbed your attention.
Yeah, I mean, I just found this extraordinary. I mean, you know, we're supposed to believe that the White Helmets are some Syrian grassroots NGO, right? Here to help the civilians, simple people from simple backgrounds just doing their best. Here we have them deploying, I mean, anybody who speaks a modicum of English, if you're talking about honoring the dead, which we assume this is what they're trying to portray, you would use the term RIP, rest in peace, right? The use of the terminology swarms is just bizarre to me. It's not a word that the majority of Syrians here that even speak very good English would know the meaning of. And this is the term that we have to remember was employed by David Cameron in relation to the so-called influx of refugees from Syria, and he was greatly criticized for that. But the concept of swarming, of course, also comes from the RAND new warfare, the introduction of small cells of fighting forces that are described as swarms to destabilize a nation. So the use of this term to me is just quite extraordinary in this context.
Can I just say, Vanessa, of course, one of the things it does show is that the White Helmets have come into contact with this sort of language. And I think probably that gives us a clue back to where that language, where that policy is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, look, we've got another little video clip here, which you took yourself a couple of days ago of some of the kidnapped from Eastern. Is this from Douma being released?
This is from Douma. Yeah, this was actually when was it? It was on Sunday night, and we'd been told that the final negotiations had gone through. The Syrian government and the Russian negotiating teams had secured the release of up to 5,000 kidnapped victims who'd been held and incarcerated in what Gerrish al-Islam, remember, promoted by the British government, what they called repentance prisons. So in those prisons, they held women, majority children, and civilians who did not adhere to their extremist ideology. Now, they were a major bargaining chip for Gerrish al-Islam, and of course, a major issue for the Syrian government to secure their release. There are people here in Damascus who've been waiting for their relatives to return home for up to 6 years, living always with the hope that they would see them again. This was the first bus that came out, and I have to say, even I broke down. I watched around me battle-hardened Syrian Arab Army soldiers breaking down, literally crying on each other's shoulders. This is the degree to which the Syrian Arab Army is of the Syrian people. Many of those kidnapped victims will be either from the Syrian Arab Army or from their families. So this was a tremendously emotional moment. However, what we've now discovered, and it's heartbreaking news, is the fact that only around 100 of those kidnapped victims, so 100 out of almost 5,000 maximum, are actually alive. The rest we have discovered today are quite possibly dead, quite possibly were executed by Gerrish al-Islam. We know leading up to the final negotiations that there were reports of executions of those hostages in order to pressure the Syrian government, but it now appears that none of them are alive. So I just ask people to try to imagine, in the midst of all of this warmongering by the British government, exactly what the organisation that has been promoted by the British government has just done to the Syrian people. It's taken 6 years of hope and just prayer that their children, that their families, that their fathers, brothers, uncles would be alive. And they've now just basically been told they're not. They're never going to see them again. I can't even explain to you the messages that are coming into me, the feeling here, which is very soon going to turn into a wave of anger, and which is going to be very difficult to contain for the Syrian government, on top of course, what is being foisted upon them by the international community.
And there's really no hope that there's any exaggeration in this. That is the scale of it.
That's the scale of it. I mean, obviously there are still questions as to how they did die. The majority of them were going to be held in underground prisons. So to be honest, they would have been safe from the majority of the airstrikes. So the natural conclusion right now is that they would have been executed in one way, shape or form. Either they could have been gassed, because we've obviously seen facilities for that, both underground and overground in the terrorist-held areas. But all of that is currently speculation. The reality is all of those thousands of people in Damascus, and I saw them there welcoming the first batch of kidnapped victims. I mean, just extraordinary scenes. The majority of those civilians are now being told they will never see their family member again.
Yeah, and in the meantime, while you're there covering that, of course, people that are covering the truth in Syria are coming under increasing attack from the Western media. Haaretz suggesting that anybody that defends Assad are white supremacists. We've got sections of the Labour Party, Blairite sections of the Labour Party suggesting or arguing that the left should not be reluctant to condemn despots like Assad and Putin. Well, this even outdoes the Guardian and several other attacks that have come out on you and others in recent days and weeks. This is Newsweek. Fake news tourism in Syria. Westerners search for truth, but are they Assad's pawns? And they begin by focusing on Reverend Andrew Ashdown, who we've had on this program, a good friend, and one of the most genuine, nicest people you could ever meet. And yet he's the subject of this. It goes on to continue to attack you and Eva Bartlett as usual. But clearly the mainstream media continue to be unbelievably determined to try to undermine the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think we have to try to see this as a victory, because they wouldn't be paying attention unless we were doing damage. And somebody actually messaged me on my blog last night very kindly. I can't remember his name to put it out, but he basically told me that for the first time in German mainstream media, he'd seen the term white helmets affiliated to terrorist factions, to Islamist factions, sorry. So in other words, I think we're getting through, and this is clearly what they don't like. I mean, for example, alongside Skripal and the fake chemical weapon attack, we're also seeing the sudden re-emergence of the Mary Colvin case, and the release of the film, which is based basically on Paul Conroy's narrative. who is the cameraman who was with her when she died in Baba Amra in February 2012. So it's interesting that this, it appears to be as if everything is being thrown into manufacturing consent for this regime change war or to some sort of military conflict in Syria right now. And I have to also say that the Mary Colvin story, following work I've done here, has also some very questionable elements in it that, again, mainstream media has never looked into, never investigated. It's never talked to people who were involved in the case who have a different version, let's say, to Paul Conroy's. So, I think right now we're seeing almost a last-ditch attempt by the US coalition and, by its media followers to finally push forward into Syria militarily.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for that. We're gonna move on. Stay with us if you possibly can, because we'll come on to Skripal in a minute. But in the meantime, Brian, the BBC continues to pump out the propaganda.
Yes, well, I just saw this as a front page earlier this morning. Trump pledges forceful action on Syria, and then you've got the other little one to the right. What are the US options on Syria? We just highlight those. But the key bit here is that if you look at the left-hand report there, it's the US leader says a response will come shortly to Saturday's alleged chemical attack. So we've now got reporting. It's quite amazing. The believe, maybe, might, alleged is now just disappearing into the background. It's become fact.
Yeah.
So if you read what the mainstream media are saying, they are qualifying all of their statements with possibles, maybe, might, alleged. But then it's like, just push that to one side. Now we're going to tell you what the government line is. And the BBC's doing it, newspapers are doing it. If we follow this one through, here's the BBC full headline on this. Syria chemical attack, Trump pledges forceful US response. UK Prime Minister Theresa May has said she utterly condemns the barbaric alleged chemical weapons attack. Now, I think that this reporting is at best grossly misleading, because if you've got an alleged attack, how can you actually condemn it? Don't you need to find out the facts first? But the BBC doesn't worry with that sort of thing. It prints that. So read it again. UK Prime Minister Theresa May has said she utterly condemns the barbaric alleged chemical weapons attack.
Yeah.
This is a nonsense sentence.
Yes, because we're going to, in our minds, drop the alleged.
Yeah, drop the alleged, and you're going to go with the bulk of the sentence. So is this the BBC actually using on-the-spot NLP on people?
Yeah.
At worst, it's crass reporting. I think what's going on here is actual applied psychology to drill this into people's minds. And if that's the BBC, let's get into The Guardian. Because, well, of course, what's The Guardian got to say? Yulia Skripal discharged from hospital after the Salisbury attack. Well, this is really good news, Mike. This young lady's had a dose of military-grade nerve agent. She was untreated for several hours, and now she's out of hospital and she's absolutely fine. But let's have a look at the reporting, because this is the key bit. Skripal, 33, flew to the UK on the 3rd of March, the day before she and her father are believed to have been poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent. Now, the funny thing is that Porton Down has actually said it was Novichok.
Yeah.
They are saying we can't say whether the Russians did it, but here it's transposed to believed. So it's almost like the journalists are getting confused themselves, because there's fact as far as Porton Down's concerned, it was Novichok, but here it's believed.
It's another clever psychological trick, isn't it? Because if you take a fact and you apply the word believed to it, then the next time you take a lie and apply the word believed to it, then people are going to accept that as a fact.
But are these journalists that clever, or are they beginning to get caught up in this spin themselves? I'm going to say I think it's mainly that. But here's the second bit we pulled out. The testimony of the Skripals will be crucial in establishing the credibility of the government's claim that it was highly likely the Russian state targeted. Well, hang on a minute, because we've already got through to the fact it was the Russians. No. The credibility of the government's claim. So this is media spin, and obviously one thing is needed, and that's to put these people on trial.
Absolutely. Details at mediaontrial.uk. Do get along to this if you can in Leeds, 27th of May. Tickets and details are available on that website. Vanessa Beeley will be speaking. Vanessa's had to run on, but she will be speaking at that, as will a number of others. So do get along if you can.
Indeed. And we'll also remind people of our NHS conference, May the 12th. We need help from our viewers and listeners to help us promulgate this event. This is going to be absolutely unique because the quality of the speakers is extraordinary. This is the first time there has ever been a major event talking about what's really going on inside the NHS. So please help us to push this far and wide. It is a vast venue, maximum capacity. The Albert Hall in Nottingham can take 600 people. And the NHS deserves that type of capacity. So please help to promulgate that. And if you haven't already got a ticket, please get on to the UK Column website and purchase a ticket. So NHS, got a few problems treating ordinary people, Mike, but NHS superb in countering Russian military-grade nerve agents.
Absolutely. So the official statement was made this morning, and Dr. Christine Blanchard, who's medical director of Salisbury District Hospital, almost the first thing she said was, "I will not be taking questions following this statement." So she made the statement, no possibility of questions. She said, following the incident on March 4th, Salisbury District Hospital received 3 people who required inpatient care: Sergei and Yulia Skripal and DS Nick Bailey, who was discharged on March 22nd. All 3 had been exposed to a nerve agent, a highly toxic chemical, which aims to prevent the nervous system from functioning. While I won't go into great detail, she said, about the treatment we've been providing, I will say that nerve agents work by attaching themselves to a particular enzyme in the body, which then stops the nerves from working properly. This results in symptoms such as sickness, hallucinations, and confusion. Our job in treating the patients has been to stabilise them, ensuring that the patients could breathe and that blood can continue to circulate. We then needed to use a variety of different drugs to support the patients until they could create more enzymes to replace those affected by the poisoning. We also used specialised decontamination techniques to remove any residual toxins. Both patients have responded exceptionally well to the treatment we've been providing, but equally both patients are at different stages of the recovery. Yulia has now been discharged from Salisbury District Hospital. Yulia has asked for privacy from the media, and I want to reiterate that request. I also want to take this opportunity to wish Yulia well. This is not the end of her treatment, but marks a significant milestone. Her father has also made good progress. There was a little bit more to it than that, but nonetheless, that was their position. Amazing work by the NHS to carry this out.
Amazing stuff, Mike. I'm going to drill into that a little bit deeper, and we found some interesting things out about the hospital. Okay. Does this story stack up?
Well, indeed. And now the Russian embassy pushed out this statement. We congratulate Yulia Skripal on her recovery, yet we need urgent proof that what's being done to her is done of her own free will. So this is a very important question, I think. Now, the Russian embassy have requested that they meet with Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, and they've requested a meeting with him, and they made a statement about what they plan to discuss. Here is the Russian ambassador. He said that more than a month has passed since the poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury. In the absence of any evidence presented publicly, Prime Minister Theresa May blamed Russia on the basis of some classified intelligence. For over a month, we've had no information about Scotland Yard's ongoing investigation. It is unprecedented given the nature of the accusations against Russia. As we understand, this classified information must be transformed into public evidence, and we will, of course, study and check it. In this context, the United Kingdom faces a number of challenges. Unfounded accusations against Russia and the cessation of high-level political contacts have seriously complicated Russian-British relationship. Hard evidence pending, Britain's image has been severely damaged in the eyes of the Russian people. To sum up, both on the bilateral and multilateral levels, the Conservative government bluntly refuses to cooperate while conducting an investigation in a way that is not transparent either to the international community or its own public. Purely out of professional interest, I wonder how long the British political system can sustain such pressure. I think that is a very good question, Brian.
It's a very good question, and let's let's help the process along a bit by drilling back into the Skripal case. So here's the Guardian report, and of course everything is okay because Yulia's now out of hospital with apparently no ill effects, it would appear. So we've seen previous poisoning victims with badly pockmarked skin or people suffering neurological problems, but it appears that Yulia is out, but she said it was a little bit of a confusing few days. Now she needs her privacy before she goes off to America, presumably. So let's have a look at the lady that was brought in to do the talking. Here she is, Christine Blanchard, the medical director, graduated in medicine from Cambridge University, 25 years NHS experience, a consultant gastroenterologist and general physician. She's undertaken a variety of managerial roles alongside her clinical work before joining the trust as director of strategy and associate medical director at Horton University Hospital, etc. So this appears to be a very modern doctor in an NHS trust. A lot of leadership around this lady, but she was the one that was pulled out in front of the cameras to speak. And basically, the message is military grade nerve agents. That is just no problem for the NHS, Mike. And I wish back in the Cold War days when, of course, we had hundreds of thousands of servicemen and women who were actually pretty frightened of this stuff because they were told, you get it on you, you are going to die. That was clearly bad advice, because we now know in 2018 that if you wash your clothes properly, that's what Public Health England had to say, and you can get into a hospital, even if it's a few hours after you've been contaminated, these people are going to sort you out. Magic. It's remarkable, isn't it? Remarkable. So I just wanted to bring what this lady said on screen, and then people can freeze it and actually consider the wording in detail. Mike's run through most of this, but they had round-the-clock care from clinicians. They don't say who those experts are, Mike. No, we don't want to talk about the experts that actually sorted these people out. They're just anonymous people in the background.
Because they should be, they should get some kind of award for this, really.
I would have thought so. Let's get them in front of the cameras and praise them and ask them how they managed to do it, because this is a major breakthrough in chemical warfare defence. She said that she wanted to wish Yulia well. Significant milestone. Father's also made good progress. He isn't in quite such good condition, but it's clear that they're expecting Sergei to come out of hospital feeling totally well very shortly. It's like it's all running on rails. It's very good. As you said, here she is describing the nerve agents and how they work. What I picked up on is that she says this results in symptoms such as sickness and hallucinations.
Yes.
Now, these are the military-grade nerve agents that were designed to kill as quickly as possible. That's now been dropped out of the dialogue, Mike. They're nasty little things. They can make you feel a bit poorly. Maybe you get a bit of hallucination. So this is utter nonsense coming out of this woman's mouth. Has she been briefed to say this? I would guess so, but we'll come back. Military-grade nerve agents, no problem for the NHS. She talks about using different drugs to treat them, contamination techniques. Nobody heard anything at all about contamination techniques used around Salisbury, nor did we hear anything about when the two contaminated people were taken into the local hospital. There's been utter silence on that, so no problem for the NHS. Now, what is remarkable is while this lady was brought in front of the camera, this man wasn't. And this is just fascinating, because we find that on this NHS Trust board, we have a man who was the chief medical planner in the UK Ministry of Defence. So he's an experienced army doctor. He's worked for the UN Protection Force in Croatia. He has been the chief medical planner in the UK Ministry of Defence. And this man is in the background and we don't see anything of him. Why would that be? I don't know.
No.
We'll ask the question, why wasn't this man used as the Salisbury Hospital spokesman for the Skripal nerve agent attack? And I think he should have been, because when we look into his background, it gets more interesting because he's also Mr. Ebola. So he has been an expert in Ebola crisis. He's in the hospital where these two Novichok victims come. He's an expert with the MOD, but you don't hear anything from him.
So the very least you can say is that he has significantly more, orders of magnitude more expert and practical experience than this common purpose leader that they've trotted out for this statement.
Yeah, and he was formerly with Save the Children. So, I mean, this man has certainly been around a bit.
Yes.
So I think there's some questions there. But other people are really picking up on what's going on. Now, I'm going to say I've watched this little video clip. I'm taking it at face value. It's come from the Russians. But it is just fascinating, because what it is pointing out is that some very strange things went on with the Skripal's pets.
We should just mention the title. UK treatment of Skripal's pets was appalling. Worse, it pokes a big hole in the poisoning story, if anybody wants to search for it.
Well, I'm going to encourage people to search for it. I just took a couple of screenshots which tell the story, but basically they're saying that Skripal is being investigated by a group of over 400 policemen and military employees. And of course, they're all dressed up in their hazmat suits because the whole area is so dangerous. But then it transpired that when they searched the house, they just didn't notice that there were 4 pets in the Skripal's house. And I think that was 3 guinea pigs and a cat. And it took this lady, it took Yulia Skripal's cousin, Victoria, to actually ask the British authorities what was happening with the pets. Whereupon they said, oh dear, we'll go back into the house. So they went back into the house, but by that stage it was too late, and the guinea pigs were all dead. And the cat, I think, was in a pretty bad condition as well. And I understand that the cat has now been put down. So we are to believe that the British government put in a team to search and decontaminate the Skripal's house.
But they just tripped over the pets and didn't
Well, they
notice
didn't
them?
even see them. They didn't realise they were there.
Maybe it's the lack of visibility out of the hazmat suits. Could that have been it?
Possible. But also, isn't it remarkable that the animals don't appear to have died of that Novichok agent? So we'll leave people to think what that little clip means. Bring in Theresa May. Of course, if we go back in time, she was well reported in the mainstream press saying that the Skripals, Sergei and Yulia, may never recover fully. This is so bad that they may never recover fully. But now, thanks to the NHS, everything is fine. Yeah. We've now treated these military-grade nerve agent victims. I'm going to say this is a pack of lies from start to finish. And I'm encouraging people to visit this Twitter page. Sorry, Mike, can you read that one for me? It's a bit small. I should have blown this up on the screen. If you freeze the screen, you can read it.
It's Dev Utopia.
That's it, Dev Utopia. He says, oh my goodness, the media are just going over the top in their coverage of the Salisbury attack. Their spin attempts to bail out the Tories from their shambolic handling of this are turning into farce. This is a real report from Sky News. It's better than any comedy. And I'd encourage you to go and click on that little embedded video clip. And there is a report from Sky News, and it is a comedy. Basically, they say, amongst other things, those nasty Russians are so nasty they're engaging in cyber warfare and they're masters of propaganda. They've asked the UK government too many reasonable questions. They're so nasty, they've put in too many reasonable questions. Their own foreign affairs team answered all of the questions that the press put to them.
So that's the Russian foreign affairs team?
Yes. So the Russians answered all the questions in a prolonged press session. And what this means is that the Russians now appear open and the UK government appears secretive. So those nasty Russians, by answering the questions, have made themselves look good and the UK government look bad. And they mentioned the recording of the Yulia Skripal telephone conversation, and the Sky News reporter says, well, yes, it appears real.
Oh.
So that was obviously really nasty of the Russians to put in a real recording. And then they finish it off by just saying those nasty Russians. So this is pretty amazing stuff. How can we summarize what's going on here? Well, I tried to do it like this. We're calling it the analysis of madness in the Theresa May bunker. But let's begin here. Theresa May, it's alleged that there's been a murder in Syria. What does the policeman say? I think we should investigate the facts. Theresa May, I want the murderer killed. The policeman, I think we should establish if there was a murder, who committed it and why. Theresa May, there has been a murder and I want the murderer punished by death. Policeman, I think we should establish the facts. You say the murder is alleged. Theresa May, there has been a murder and it was a Russian. I want him killed. My US and EU friends all say it was a Russian. The policeman, under a fair process of law, we should investigate the facts before deciding who may have committed the alleged murder. There should be an investigation and trial. Then we can decide the punishment. But Theresa May, the facts are there has been a murder committed by a Russian. We don't need a trial. He's a terrorist and we want him killed. Policeman, who is the Russian? Theresa May, Putin.
Yes.
I mean, if we conducted investigations in UK on this basis, this would be how it would go.
I can't comment on that.
Can't comment further. No, it's amazing, isn't it? But here we are. Theresa May gathers her national security chiefs as Tony Blair calls for military action in Syria without a vote of MPs.
Yes.
So here's the dictatorship, and here's Tony Blair, the man of death, the crafter of the lies of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he says, well, it's possible to draw a distinction between airstrikes and troops on the ground as to whether you need a commons vote. You can launch an attack against another nation state as long as it's by the Air Force. But if you want to put troops on the ground, that's different.
But either way, people are dead.
Either way, people are dead, yeah. It's important that when chemical weapons are used in this way, alleged chemical weapons, of course, and the international community has taken a firm position against it, this is your point over the law, Mike, that you have to enforce it. So this man engineers the weapons of mass destruction report, and basically he's now after the same in Syria. But this one got the biscuit. It's from a few days ago, but the Telegraph, the UK-EU response to Russian aggression is good news for our post-Brexit teamwork. And that says it all. What is going on here is theatre, because this helps the utter lie of Brexit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's just end on this one. Project Servator, because of course we've been talking about the fusion doctrine recently and the merging of various groups of types of institution to create the dictatorship that we are increasingly living under. Now, Project Servator was originally started by City of London Police in July 2016. The aim, they say, is to deter any hostile threat by detecting suspicious activity in the local area. It's a bit unfortunate that apparently Project Servator didn't seem to be deployed in Salisbury at the time, but never mind. Project Servator, an inclusive collaboration community strategy designed to deter, detect and disrupt all forms of criminal activity, including terrorism. It relies on local people and businesses to be the eyes and ears for the police. It encourages residents and staff to be vigilant and to be the eyes and ears for police and ensure safety and security. It sees the deployment of specially trained, highly visible and covert police officers, supported by other resources such as dogs, firearms officers, marine police units, plainclothes officers, vehicle checkpoints, automatic number plate recognition and CCTV. Well, last Thursday, the Metropolitan Police hosted a formal launch event. You can see one of the images from that at the Tower of London to mark the London-wide introduction of Project Servator. The Ministry of Defence Police was involved in it as well, so they were added to that, as well as British Transport Police. And Superintendent Nick Aldworth, head of the Met's Servator team, said working with the community is a vital part of making Project Servator a success. And record numbers of people have been contacting the police to report suspicious activity. Every day, Project Servator officers will enlist the help of businesses, security staff, community groups, members of the public to be vigilant and make it even harder for criminals, including terrorists, to succeed. By being vigilant, we can all create a hostile environment for potential terrorists who may be considering their targets for individuals looking to commit crime. The public shouldn't be worried if a deployment happens in their area. Don't worry about it. In fact, I encourage, he says, anyone to talk to officers to find out more. The public can help keep their community safe from terrorism by reporting anything that seems out of place, unusual, or doesn't seem to fit with day-to-day life. But the issue here is this, because in recent months and years, we've seen the police, various police services around the country housing many of their, quotes, domestic extremism units within or alongside their counter-terrorism units. So a number of police forces have counter-terrorism, as a single unit, counter-terrorism and domestic extremism units. The National Coordinator for Domestic Extremism, National Domestic Extremism Unit, was established under the Terrorism and Allied Matters Committee of the Association of Chief Police Officers when that still existed. And if you look at the Essex Police Project Servator page, it includes this quote: criminals, whether extreme protest groups, organised crime groups or terrorists, have to conduct hostile reconnaissance in order to plan a successful attack. And this is why I'm raising this, really, this statement and this attitude, because what we have is what they are describing as extreme protest groups merged in with organised crime and terrorism. This is extremely dangerous, in my opinion, Brian, because at what point does a protest group become extreme? We have seen in recent days, weeks and months that the definition of extremism is becoming so broad that it brings in everybody from far-right extremism to people that are protesting against fracking, to people that are protesting against on green issues, and so it goes. So, this is a step further than really society wants to be taking.
Yeah, it is the Stasi state. It's very interesting today that people in our chat box are actually commenting that this is a fascist state coming into power. That is exactly what it is. And of course, where is the criminal activity? Well, it's not so much on the streets and amongst communities. The deep criminal activity is inside our own government. It forms the deep state. And of course, this is where the whole problem is coming from. So what can we do about it? Well, as we always say to people, you can do a lot by challenging it in a perfectly reasonable way. Get onto those Twitter pages for the mainstream press, get onto the BBC's website, point out where their reporting is inaccurate, point out the dangers, and keep pushing this information back into the mainstream media. On a positive note, we can say, as we've said several times before, we are contacted by mainstream journalists. They're very, very interested in what we're talking about. They are clearly realizing that the reporting is backed by evidence, by factual evidence, and they are coming to us for more information. What they tell us, of course, is that within the mainstream media, there is fear. And the fear is because if, as an ordinary journalist, you start to work out that your paper, your newspaper, your TV channel is lying, if you say something, you're going to lose a job. So what can we do to help these people? We can encourage what do we say, the journalists who are starting to wake up by feeding them with good information, encouraging them, helping them, and also challenging what their newspapers are saying at every opportunity if we can prove that it's false. This is effective and it is starting to work. So it's good stuff. And I'll also add that we know that the subject of weapons of mass destruction and the death of Dr. Kelly is in the minds of many journalists as they watch this latest pack of lies from Theresa May's Conservative government. That's it for today. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.